got a great film to play, just
Hello? Have you ever snubbed a lady?
we had a technical problem.
Are we on?
Yeah, we're on there.
Can I swear? Shit!
Welcome to Crunch and Roll, tales from the dysfunctional world of radio, told by the people who've been there, done that, and can't see out the back window of the car because it's just full of classic radio station stickers. I'm John Fox, and in a former life spent 2 decades presenting on big old stations in Birmingham, Reading, Hull and Stoke. Now, there's no denying all those stations are a little bit, well, English. So today, we're going right up the A1, over Hadrian's Wall to Edinburgh. Well, metaphorically, we did the interview on Zoom. Boogie is the target of my probing in this episode, a stalwart of Scottish radio and also the instigator of some of the most debauched antics that vessels on the North Sea have ever experienced. In this episode, of course, we talk about the legendary hi-jinx on the high seas, knitwear, and unbelievable, in a bad way, management encounter of day 3 of his dream gig, and we get serious discussing the lack of Scottish voices on radio outside of Scotland. Now, before we start, if you enjoy the podcast, we're always eternally grateful for any support that you can give us on Ko-fi. I want to say a massive thank you to everybody who's backed us recently. Paul, thanks very much for sticking that 50p in the meter. It did get us going again. James Masterson, do let us know actually who you know, and we'll see what we can do. Mike Peters, thanks for the kind words. Stacey Harris, ditto. Jim D, really pleased to hear that we make sense outside the radio bubble. And also the guys at Broadcast Bionics, you are legends. Thank you so much. That's the Christmas party sorted. Now, to add your name to this legendary list, just go to ko-fi.com/crunchandroll. Oh yeah. Andy, how are you?
I'm very well, Foxy. It's lovely to meet you at last.
Do I call you Andy or Boogie?
Well, everybody, including my wife, calls me Boogie.
Does she?
So, yeah, the whole thing about Boogie and where it all came from is my surname is quite unusual. My surname is Boogless, so it's the same as Douglas, but with a B. And so my dad was Boogie, my granddad was Boogie, and I was Boogie since I was in P1 at school. And so I could only ever become like a radio presenter or a stripper. So it had to be the radio for me, really.
And why not the stripping?
Well, there'd be plenty to see, I suppose. But yeah, no, not for me.
Well, thank you so much for coming on our little podcast. You are our second Scottish presenter.
Paul Harper was the first, right?
He was, yeah.
He was actually the first episode that I heard. I don't know. I've known Paul for a long time. It was probably through social media. I saw a link to it, and I clicked on it, and I thought, "Oh, this is good." And it's because it's proper anarchy in it. It's proper radio people talking to other radio people about radio, and we all get very excited about talking about ourselves for an hour, don't we? So, and then obviously I've listened to loads of episodes since then. But yeah, Paul Harper.
You were saying before we hit record that you're finding this slightly strange because you're being interviewed as opposed to being the person who does the interview.
Yeah. It's weird. You know, like I've interviewed, especially in the last 5 years, you know, the biggest stars in the world, you know, like Bruno Mars and Taylor Swift and you name them all. And I'm more nervous about doing this with you than I was about interviewing them. Because when you're interviewing someone, you just, you know, you prep the questions and it's up to them to respond in their way, but now I've got to try and think of interesting things to say for a bit, so that's going to be hard.
Well, if it makes you feel any better, you're not the only person to say those exact same words. that they are slightly nervous, but there's nothing to be nervous about. It's just the love of radio, isn't it?
Yeah,
so it's
absolutely.
All good. So, look, there's no disguising it, Boogie. You are from Scotland. Whereabouts in Scotland are you from?
Well, I was born in a place called Hawick. Where
is that?
Hawick. It's right in the south. It's if you could draw a triangle between Edinburgh, Newcastle and Carlisle, it's right in the middle of that triangle. So it's in the middle of nowhere. It's probably about 40 miles from north of Carlisle, 60 miles from Newcastle, 50 miles south of Edinburgh. So right in the middle of no man's land. You know, we were the sort of first line of defence against the English for many, many years. And the interesting thing is, I guess, which was quite unusual in terms of my radio career, is that we didn't have radio when I was a kid. You know, we didn't have any local radio at all. In fact, local radio in the borders didn't come around until I was like 19 years old. So we only had Radio 1, Radio 2, you know, the BBC, And then there was, one or two crackly things on long wave and whatever. But we didn't have like a Key or a Radio City or a Metro or even a Fourth or a Clyde. There's nothing like that in the Borders. So I didn't really have much of an interest in radio. My dad, when he was working, was a sort of travelling sales manager. So he spent a lot of time in the car. So he was in the car for 8 hours a day. So he was listening to, all DLT and Simon Bates and all the rest of it. And I remember when I first got my first interest in radio was that I had to go to London with him. So we were in the car for like 7 hours, going from Hawick all the way down to London. And we listened to Radio 1, I think it was, the whole time, on 1053 or whatever it was, back then. And I remember I was like listening to it. It was fun. Steve Wright was on in the afternoon and it made me giggle and there was a few bits and bobs. And when we got to London, my dad pointed at a building and he said, that they're all in there. They're in that very building. That's where they are. And I was like, all these people I've been listening to all day are right there. They're there now in that building. And he was like, yeah. And I'll always remember that. That was like a real sort of switch on of a love for radio for me. Do you know what I mean? And it was, I could pinpoint it to that exact day when I actually became interested in radio. And then when I came home from that trip, got a little radio in my bedroom, a little sort of radio alarm. And again, it was mostly Radio 1. And then it was only a few years later when Radio Borders came along that I kind of managed to sort of wangle away into it.
So in 1986, which surprises me, Andy, because you're only 34 years old, but in 86, you do what many of us do, and you went to Hospital Radio in your hometown of Hawick, which is, by the way, is now my favourite name of a place on the planet. Hawick. It sounds amazing.
Not only do you say the place name, but you clear your throat at the same time.
Hawick. I love it.
And so I used to go on a Saturday night to the youth club because there was nothing to do in Hawick, right?
Sorry, Boogie, just tell me about Hawick because I'm trying to picture this. Is Hawick a small town? Is it a village?
Yeah, at the time, it was probably about 18,000 of a population. So a sizable town. It was probably the biggest town in the area, in the Borders. Mm-hmm. But still relatively small. But at the time, it was really booming because it was the home of, you ever heard of Pringle of Scotland, the jumper, Pringle jumpers, the golf jumpers. Yeah. So that's what the whole town was based around, the knitwear industry. So all the best knitwear in the world was made in Hawick. And there was different brands. There was Lyle and Scott, which is still on the go. There was Pringle. There was all the other ones. And the whole town revolved around the knitwear industry. And that's what my dad worked in. My dad worked for Pringle. And he was the sales guy. And then eventually he went into sort of international sales. So he did a lot of traveling around the world. And when I finished school, I went to the local college and I was learning textiles and sales and all that kind of stuff with an eye to moving into the knitwear trade. And it just so happened that one of my lecturers at college was a guy called John Phillips. Now, John was involved right at the very start of Radio Borders. He was doing the first ever drive time show. But it was just a part-time thing. So he was doing the lecturing during the day and then going to the college and doing the radio show at night. And I told him that I'd been really interested in some hospital radio, but it was nothing. See, it wasn't an actual hospital radio station. We just sort of record some stuff and send it up on a cassette. Nobody would ever listen to it. And then when Radio Borders was starting and John Phillips got me along, that was a proper radio station. It had transmitters and listeners. And it was right at the very start. It was the week before it went on air that I actually first went in. And literally just started, making coffees, putting the bins out, putting all the CDs back in the CD rack in the right slot, because they were all numbered. And that was the sort of starting point of my radio career. But I still, at this point, I still had a full-time job with Pringle in the sales team, and it was a good job. It was I was becoming an area sales manager, so I actually moved to Preston of all places, right, in Lancashire, and we're sort of fast forwarding a little bit, but I ended up working in the job that my dad had done 25 years earlier, selling Pringle jumpers to golf clubs across the northwest of England, everything from Stafford all the way up to sort of Carlisle. So, and when I did that, that was when I really started listening to local radio. You know, there was Rock FM was my station in Preston, but there was Key, there was City, there was Signal, CFM had opened by that point as well. So I was travelling about just listening to all this radio and just sort of absorbing it all, you know. And yeah, a lot of it sort of stuck with me as we moved through my career, you know.
So, I mean, obviously, for somebody who had a passion for radio, for when Radio Borders launched, that must have been like all your Christmases coming at once.
Yeah, it was. And it was like nothing we'd ever had before. Because, you know, it was hyper local. I mean, you know, from having nothing at all to suddenly getting information about temporary traffic lights on Selkirk High Street, you know, it was like, woof. And it just came out of nowhere. And the guy who was the first managing director was a guy called Rod Webster. And Rod was a great guy. He was a salesman. So he was all about selling the advertising and getting all the promotions and all the rest of it. But he really understood radio and what made great listening content for, well, you wouldn't call it content back then, but, you know, stuff that was engaging. And I think in the first 9 months, 68% reach.
Wow.
68%. Can you imagine that? That was like, it was like everybody listened to it all the time. Like the other stations didn't, I mean, there was only Radio 1, Radio 2, but yeah, it blew everything out of the water. It was huge. And I don't think anything's ever been as high as that.
So on our little prep that we do, Boogie, 1991, Radio Borders, it was your first proper station, as you've said, and you did various shows, but all voluntary.
Yeah.
You did things like Saturday night, 6 till 8. You did that for 3 months. Then moved
that was
Scottish.
My first ever show. It was called Best of the Borders, and it was a chart compiled from record sales in the Borders and was in no way made up.
Everybody in the industry has done that show.
Do you know,
it's absolute bull.
We had the top 20, right? And sort of number 20 to number 6 were set. But the top 5, we used to like play a little clip of them and say, phone now and vote for your favourite. And I think one week we got like 3 votes. And 2 of them were for one song, so that was number 1. The other one was number 2, and then we just made it up. But it was great fun, and you know you can make a lot of mistakes. And I mean, the chart show is the easiest show in the world, right? Because it's just like at the end of the day, that was number 3, this is number 2, so it's, you know, it's quite easy. But it was a great experience, a good starting point. But I only did that for a little while, and then pretty much ever since then, it's just been breakfast shows all the way.
So I'm interested as well because you mentioned that you worked for Pringle. You moved to Preston, and you, as you say in your words, to do a proper job. And I understand what you're saying because radio is not a proper job, is it? It's not. You know, we get away. Well, you get away with murder. I used to get away with murder. But I'm interested because you got a call, didn't you, in 1998 out of the blue from the man that you mentioned previously, Rod Webster.
That's right.
Do you just explain what happened and how did he get your number? And then I also want to know about that decision from walking away from what sounds like a fantastic career to take a huge risk.
Yeah. So I'd worked voluntary at Radio Borders for about 2.5, 3, 4 years, maybe max. Did it at weekends. So basically I was working Monday to Friday and then Saturday morning getting up at 4 o'clock, going to Galashiels where the studio was, on air 6 till 9, and I did that every week for about 3 years. Absolutely loved it. I mean, the audience didn't, but I loved it. So Rod was the managing director of Borders at that point, and at that point my career with Pringle really started to take off, and that's when I got the area manager job in England. So I had to quit radio altogether, sort of 96, and say, right, that's it, I'm off, and I've got a proper job. And yeah, so I found myself where my dad had been, driving about for hours and hours every day, just listening to people like Kev Seed and, you know, goodness me, Rossi, who's on Greatest Hits now. See, he was on Rock FM at the time. And it was such a brilliant show. The station, Rock FM, late 90s, was the absolute best I've ever heard in terms of a local radio station. Anyway, so I'm working down there, and now in the meantime, Rod Webster, who'd been at Borders, was promoted to North Sound in Aberdeen, and now Rod was a former RAF guy, so he was at ease and all the rest of it. So he phoned me up, and I'll never forget it. It was sort of late '97. And it was a Thursday night, and I was getting ready to go out and play sort of five-a-side football. I used to do that every Thursday night. And I was just about to leave the house. And of course, it was all house phones back then, right? So I'm just about to leave the house, and the phone rings. And I'm like, I'm not going to, oh God, I better take it. But it might be important. So I picked it up, and it was Rod, and he went, "Yes, Buglas at ease." And I was like, "Oh, hello, Rod." And he's like, "Yes, how are you?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm fine." I said, "I haven't spoken to you for a while." He said, Yes. Now, hypothetically speaking, if a hypothetical job in radio full-time was to come up, what would be your thoughts? Would you be interested? And I said, "Well, I'd have to think about it." Yes! Pretty much like that. And he's like, "Okay, well, jolly good. Come up and see me in Aberdeen." And I'm in Preston. It's like 8 hours drive away. I'm like, "Oh, all right, okay." So we arranged it. And when I got up to Aberdeen, he admitted to me a couple of years later that he wasn't sure if he was going to ask me, and he made the call, and he thought, "I'll give it a try, and if he doesn't answer, I'll leave it and I'll go somewhere else." And I was about to not answer the phone, and just that tiny little, that little sliding doors moment.
Yeah.
That was it right there, and God, so glad I took that call. So I went way up to North Sound in Aberdeen, but to the oldies station. So I did it all sort of upside down. I started in the oldies stations and then moved on.
Yeah. I think you're one of very few who has been on Crunch and Roll who started on at AM and then moved over to FM as opposed to the other way around. Yeah,
I mean, when I started on the full-time breakfast show on North Sound 2, summer 98, I was 27. So, now I wouldn't let a 27-year-old on a hit radio station. It's too young. But I was properly out of my demographic in terms of the listeners. But it kind of worked because it meant that I really had to sort of train myself to think about what the audience wanted to hear, rather than what I was just talking about. They didn't want to hear about Love Island and stuff like that. They wanted more sort of relevant content to them. And so up I went and worked really hard. Rod was, as I said, a radio genius, and he took me under his wing. He used to go around to his house, because I didn't know anybody, so he would invite me around for dinner. And there was a great guy who was on North Sound 1 on the breakfast show at the time. His name's John Mellis. And John became one of my best pals, and he still is to this day. He does the Smooth breakfast show now in Scotland, in Glasgow. And he was a really good person to learn from as well. And, had an absolute ball living up in Aberdeen. Great times.
Can you remember any of the features that you did on your first ever breakfast show, professional breakfast show?
God, not really. There was one which actually nicked, because everything's nicked, right? It was done on, I think it was Brian Moore did it on Rock FM.
Legend.
And under the name of Jamie at the time, because he was still calling himself that at the time. And it was a game. It was like, it might have been Kev Seed, on the breakfast show. It was called Celebrity Shortcuts, right? And it was 3 clips of music, and those were 3 clues to a celebrity. So, it was quite kind of crosswordy kind of clues, it was quite, and so we did that. I nicked that, and we did it, and it was like you could win a tenner on day 1, and it went up by a tenner every day, and I think the biggest it ever got to was like 220 quid, and it was the talk of the town.
I was going to ask you, Boogie. I mean, but then obviously you'd already moved to Preston for your other proper job, as you call it. But I was going to ask how was the move to Aberdeen? Because my grandma is she was from Aberdeen. So
really?
I feel like I have a connection. I'm starting to do the accent. I apologise. But what was the move like for you?
Like loon, speaking like that in Aberdeen. It was... Aberdeen is a great place. When they take you to their heart, once you're in, you're in. And it could be a tough nut to crack, especially for an outsider. And I think I was kind of okay because I was from the borders. So I didn't really have a Glaswegian accent, which would grate a little bit in Aberdeen. And so, the accents were quite similar. So I managed to but it was such a lovely place, and the people, the audience were fantastic. I mean, they really responded. I think we doubled the radar in the first 18 months. Now, it wasn't huge numbers. You're only going from a few thousand to a few more thousand, but still, you got to take it as a win. And they were funny. Once I think it's the same in any market. Once they get you, once they take you to their heart, and you've got them on side, you can pretty much do anything, and people will respond in the way that you want them to.
It was a technical problem. You heard something on air you shouldn't have done.
Oh, yeah. So in 2001, you get a call from Forth to go to Edinburgh to do the Forth 2 breakfast show.
Yeah.
I'm guessing that's a big move, isn't it, in Scotland? Huge move.
Yeah, well, actually, there was potentially a bigger move had happened in the meantime. So I moved up to Aberdeen in 98 and I moved to Edinburgh in 2001. In about late 99, I got an approach from Clyde One. So I think I probably had sent a tape to them. Do you know what I mean? Because I even though I was having a good time in North Sound 2, I still thought, I need to try and get onto a hit station. So Clyde is obviously the biggest station in Scotland. So I sent a demo tape to the program controller at the time, and his name was Ross McFadden. Nice fella. Went down and I did a couple of demos in the studio for him, and he actually said to me, he said, "Right, we're going to get you on Clyde One," and I'm like, "Wow, okay, that's easier than I thought it was going to be." He said, "Right, so you probably need to tell Rod Webster that you're moving." So I went back up. Now, Rod, as I've said, was much more of a boss. He was like a father figure, really, I suppose. And I said to him, "I'm going to Clyde," and he wasn't happy. He wasn't, and I thought he'd be pleased for me, but he wasn't. He wasn't happy, and he was like, basically, just you're not anywhere near ready, and you're making a huge mistake. And right, off you go. I don't want anything to do with you anymore. I'm like, okay. And so anyway, fast forward. I was waiting for the call from Clyde to go. How are we going to move this forward? And it never came. Nothing for weeks and weeks and weeks, until eventually, after about 6 weeks, I had to go back to Rod and say, I'd like to stay, please. And he'd been, he was teaching me a lesson, and lesson was learned, and he was like, "Yes, okay. Well, I've already replaced you," is what he said. He hadn't, but he said, "I've already replaced you," and I was like, "Okay." So tail between the legs, went back on, and rode it out for a while, and it was all fine. But by the time the fourth thing came along, which was in 2001. That probably was the right move for me, and I think Rod knew that. Because if I'd gone, with hindsight, if I'd gone to Clyde One, I would have probably disappeared pretty quickly. But fourth came in, and they said, "We want you to come down," but the show in North Sound 2 had been flying, and they said, "We want you to come and do exactly what you're doing on North Sound 2 on Forth 2, and you're going to be the new frontman for Forth 2." And I was like, okay, I love Edinburgh. Edinburgh's a great place, quite near to where I grew up. And I was like, yeah, okay, so I'll come do it. And I nearly quit on my third day.
No, what?
Yeah. So it's as close as I've ever coming to quit. So I started on the Monday, and on the Wednesday I get the call at 5 to 9 to the studio, say, could you come up to MD's office at 9? And I'm like, yeah, sure. So now bearing in mind, every meeting I'd had with the MD up until that point was really friendly because I was new and I was the new signing and all the rest of it. And I came in and I walked in and he was sat behind his desk and he was doing this with his fingers, you know, a bit like a Bond villain, sort of strumming his fingers together like this. And I said, hi, how you doing? What's up? And he went, we'll wait until Scott arrives. Now, Scott Wilson, who was the program controller for 4th at the time, I was like, oh, okay. And by this stage, I'm thinking, what have I said? What have I done? Have I done anything wrong? Pretty confident I hadn't said anything that was going to get me into trouble. And then we sat in absolute silence for about a minute and a half. He didn't say a word. And I was like, is everything okay? And he just went, we'll just wait for Scott. And I was like, oh my God, this is a disaster. And then Scott came in and he was a bit flustered and he sat down. And I was like, guys, what's up? What's this all about? And he said, Scott said, yeah, you're trying too hard. And I'm like, I'm trying too hard. He said, you're scaring the audience. It's too much. It's too in your face. And I was like, I'm doing exactly what you brought me here for. You know, like 3 months ago, you were telling me this is exactly what you want me to do. You know, and it would work. And he's like, no, you're trying too hard. And I was like, and I could tell that Scott his heart wasn't really in it. Do you know what I mean? He wasn't really giving me, it wasn't his thoughts. He'd been told what he had to say to me. Yeah. And I just sat and I looked at the pair of them and I was like, this is, you're having a lot. Of course I'm trying hard. It's day 3 of a flipping brand new breakfast show. What do you want me to do? Just sort of going, yeah, all right, whatever. And it really sort of took the wind out of my sails really badly. Like I came out the meeting and I was like, phew. And then I think maybe the next day I sort of found myself in Scott's office just having a one-to-one. And I said, what do you mean I'm trying too hard? And I'll never forget it. He said, yeah, MD was in a coffee shop yesterday or the day before, and he'd asked the guy behind because they were listening to 4th too. He said, oh, what do you think of the new breakfast show? And the guy behind the desk had said, oh, he's trying too hard.
Brilliant.
And I was like, so it wasn't his opinion. He was just literally one person who was, you know, a grumpy old shit that works in a coffee shop who was like 70 years old, had said that I'm trying too hard, and therefore, and he made me go along to the coffee shop and like not apologize, but we had mugs, right? We had Boogie in the morning mugs. And he made me go along and give the guy a mug and say, oh, you're in a coffee shop. You know, hopefully you'll enjoy the show and I'm going to try and do that. And I was like, I was like that far away from just going, bugger this. And I vowed at that point, I'm out. I'm not staying here. I'm going to keep going until I can find something else to move on to, whether that be in radio or something else. I want to stay in radio, obviously.
Just talking about feedback there. Boogie. I remember this, and I've had such amazing bosses throughout my career whilst I was in the industry, and I've had a couple of plums. One of which I've kept no secret throughout various episodes of Crunch and Roll, but another when I was at 210, who I'll never forget. He pulled me into a meeting. He wasn't my immediate manager; he was a group manager, and we had a meeting about the fact he didn't like the way I said sunshine. That was it. Well, I don't like the way you say sunshine. And
were you saying it like sunshine?
Well, I'm not going to lie to you, Boogie. There was a little bit of that in there. but
I'd have pulled you in for that, folks. It's sunshine, young man, not sunshine.
There was a little bit of that in there, but
yeah.
really,
but it's
really...
that one word, and he's like knocked your confidence for 6, right?
Well, I'm thinking, hang on, that's literally 2 seconds of a 4-hour show, which actually we've worked our asses off. And I just wonder, because I mean, feedback from bosses sometimes can be quite hurtful, can't it? It can knock you for 6.
I think it depends. It depends who's giving you it, right? If it's somebody who you understand and you appreciate and you think it's coming from the right place and they want you to improve, then absolutely, you take it. And you might not like it straight away, but you're like, all right, I take it. But this plonker who was the MD of 4th back then, he'd never been on the radio in his life. And to say to somebody on day 3 that you're trying too hard, it knocked me for six. And you get feedback from everybody. Everybody wants to talk to you. I mean, my wife will give me feedback on the show. My mates, when we're in the pub, they'll be like, "Oh, you said this, that. Oh, that was quite funny what you said, or you shouldn't have said that, or why did you say that?" And you're like, you have to justify everything. But of course, now everything's so instant, and like since texts came along and WhatsApp and Facebook and keyboard warriors, I mean, my God, I once was on Christmas Day in the morning, right? Christmas Day in the morning. And I'm doing the show and full of the joys of Christmas. And it was brilliant. You had loads of kids on that were opening their toys and playing noises and all the rest of it. It was great. And playing Wham and Mariah, and it was fantastic. And everybody was in a great mood. And I got a message saying, I got a new digital radio for Christmas. Thank for that. It means I don't have to listen to you anymore. And you're like, it's Christmas Day. It's Christmas Day. What possesses you on Christmas Day? Anyway, and then you have to say to yourself, you don't know what's going on in these people's lives. They may be having a really tough time and they're just letting off steam. But it does get, it's like a direct attack on you. And I can't think of many jobs where you get attacked as often as you do as being a radio presenter.
Is this going out or is it just in our headphones?
The hamster's fine. It was a technical problem. You heard something on air you shouldn't have done.
Oh, yeah. So after the, not so constructive criticism, you wanted to leave. I mean, what happens next?
I kept plugging away for about a year and a bit after that. And then eventually Nick Goodman came on the scene. You'll know Nick. Do you know Nick?
No, I don't think I do.
All right. So Nick had worked at Radio 1. He'd worked with Chris Evans on The Breakfast Show there, with Dan McGrath and all the rest, when it was flying. Okay. And he got the job as Fourth's new program controller, so Fourth 1 and 2. And he was a great guy. He is a great guy. And he kind of saved me from leaving, because he then decided to switch it from Fourth 1 to Fourth 2 to Fourth 1, and the rest is history, as they say. But it was funny that was a funny story, because my mate Darren, who did the Fourth 1 breakfast show before me, so he was on 1, I was on 2, and Darren Adam, he went to LBC eventually. He left LBC about maybe 2 years ago. He lives in Iceland these days. A great broadcaster, like an absolute. But he loves talk and news and very serious things, And he hated being on Fourth 1 playing Natasha Bedingfield and all that. He hated all that. So he was looking for a change, and I was desperate to move to something. And so Nick's first day, we'd expected him to turn up at 9 o'clock. He turned up at 7. And he walked into the studio, and he walked into the Fourth 1 studio first, and Darren is sitting, probably smoking a fag in the studio, feet on the desk, flicking through the sun looking for content, and just like, oh God. And the new boss walks in, and they're like, oh yeah, hello, yes, hi. And then Nick came through to my studio, and he said, he opened the door, and all he saw was my hand appearing from behind the screen. Because I was in the middle of editing. I said, can't speak. I've got to edit this. I've got 2 minutes. It's got to be on air in just a second. And Nick almost said, like, in that moment is when he decided that, we were on the wrong stations. We needed to be flipped. And so he flipped us in March 2023. 2003. Goodness me, 22 years ago.
So, I mean, what was it like getting onto Fourth 1? Because you're on the big boy there.
Yeah, it was night and day, Foxy. It was like, because up until that point, you had audience, do you know what I mean? But you weren't, we'd go to events and nobody would bat an eyelid and nobody would be interested, and, a few thousand listeners, I guess. And then suddenly we're on Fourth 1, and it's big. It's, and at that point, it was really struggling, Fourth 1 then. We weren't number 1 in the market. Real, it was Real Radio at the time, was absolutely flying. They had more share and hours than us. They were very clear number 1 in the market. We were miles behind, and because the couple of years before I started, they'd sort of chased like Beat 106, which became Capital, so going for the younger end of the market. And we changed our music away from what we should have been doing to try and get audience back from this rival. And when you do that, you're always going to lose. So what we should have done is just stick to our guns, and it would have eventually worked out. So it took a little while to get that trust back. But it was night and day. We'd go to events and you start hosting parties, listener parties, and we started doing we did our first ever Boogie on the Boat, which was one of the first things that we did. I don't know if you've ever heard of Boogie. Have you ever heard of Boogie on the Boat?
I've written this down as something to talk about. I'm very excited to hear about the tales of Boogie on the Boat.
Oh, well, there's only so much I'm allowed to tell you, but we did. So that was the sort of launch thing for our show. So when we first started, my first co-host was a girl called Vicky Pictures, and so we launched the show together. And we one of the first things that Nick said, he said, right, you have to have a party. But it has to be a special party. And it just so happened that this ferry company in Newcastle had come along and said, do you want to do a party on a boat? We're like, yes. So that all worked out nicely. But people actually wanted to come and come and meet us, and then it's just ever since it just keeps snowballing, and even now, it's getting bigger. Even now, even after 20 years, it keeps getting just a little bit bigger. The share keeps going up.
I mean, I just Boogie on the Boat. I just want you took listeners to Amsterdam, Boogie. That had nothing but disaster written all over it.
We did it 21 times. Maybe even more than that, maybe even 23 times. So we did the first one in 2003, and then in 2004 we did 2, and then we did 1 a year for, I think, right up until COVID, pretty much. It was like an annual trip. So the deal was it cost the listener about 150 quid. So for that, you got a cabin on the boat. It was like the size of a broom cupboard, and you got your dinner on both nights, and we had a party on the boat both nights, and it was just brilliant. We had 750 listeners per time.
Amazing.
So it was almost the whole boat, not the entire boat, because there was some lorry drivers and stuff.
Can you imagine being those lorry drivers?
Yeah, can you imagine the people that couldn't get into the bar because it was a private event? You'd be raging. Anyway, but we took. And it was such a great party. So we'd leave Edinburgh 9 o'clock-ish on the Friday, down to Newcastle. There was loads of buses, we put on buses. And then we'd get on the boat, and then we'd have a sort of welcome meeting and say, here's what's going to happen. And then you have some dinner, and then the party started about 9, and it would go until 4:30, non-stop. And then up at 8, because you had to get up and off the boat, into another bus, which took you about an hour to get into Amsterdam. And then you had so that was about 10, 11 in the morning, and then you had until 4 in the afternoon to get back on the bus, back to the boat, back for your dinner, and then another party. And the Saturday was even later. It was like 5, because nobody wanted to stop. And then Sunday, my God, you've seen the Thriller video, right? When they're all walking like this. That's everybody getting back on the bus. And I mean, but just amazing. And we did it every year up until, actually last year was the last one. And the reason that we stopped it is really boring. Nothing to do with the radio station. It was the boat. There was a limit on how many people you can have in one room at one time.
Oh, really?
So, instead of having 750, we were only allowed like 400. And they said, you can still take 750, but only 400 are allowed in at a time. You're like, well, you can't do that. You can't ask people to spend all that money and then not let them in. So, and then because it was only 400, that meant there were more non-Boogie boat passengers on board, and they had nothing to do because we were taking up the party area. And so their TripAdvisor reviews started to go down, and then there was complications with Brexit. It wasn't as quick to just go through the border and back, so that delayed everything. And so it just became too much of a hassle. But I'd love to do it again one day. It's so much fun. It's great.
So, I mean, perhaps I'm focusing too much on the boat, Boogie, but I get very excited by the thought of it. It's just a brilliant idea. And we did something quite similar when we were at Viking, myself and Tom, going to Amsterdam. But have you got any and make sure they're legal. But any fond memories of your time on doing boogie on the boat?
Nothing but fond memories. I mean, the day after we came back on air on the Monday, you know, it was a disaster. But some funny things on that boat trip. Grant Stott, who was one of our colleagues, he works at the BBC now. He was at Forth for a long time. He was on the boat, and he got kicked out of our party by the security guards. And he's like, so he tried to do this trick. He had this trick where he ran up to a seat, right? He's got a seat there, and he ran up to it, put one foot on it, and then put the second foot on the back of the seat, and then tried to balance it like a seesaw. And that was his party trick. And the security kicked him out. And he was like, but it's time for bed anyway. So off he went. But one of the things I'll always remember about Boogie on the boat. So I DJ as well. So, you know, I've done a lot of club DJing and stuff in my time. And Boogie on the boat was my big gig. You know, it was a home crowd. You could do absolutely anything, and they loved it. But it was so I DJ'd on the Friday night on the way out, and then on the Saturday I could just relax a little bit and just sort of mingle with people and, you know, chill out a bit. But on the Friday night, so as I say, these parties would go until 4 a.m, and about 3 a.m, this young fella came up to me, and he was like, you know, proper salt of the earth Forth listener from like Trinent or somewhere, and he's like, Boogie, like, you ever had a Jaeger bomb? And I was like, no, I don't know what a Jaeger bomb is. Now, this was a few years ago. They'd just been invented. And he's like, do you want one? And I was like, yeah, okay. So he's like, right, so what you do is you drop the little glass into the big glass, and then you chug it. And I was like, all right, okay, fair enough. And I'm sort of trying to mix at the same time. Right, okay. It's like, actually, that tastes all right. Do you want another one? It's like, yeah, go on, I'll have another one. Now, I had no idea what was in it, right? And so I did 5. Oh. I did 5. Now, this was at 3 a.m, and I'd been on the beers, sort of, you know, as I'm going along, just chugging on a beer since 10. And I was so pissed, I knocked down the entire DJ booth. So we had a big table, and my laptop and my decks were on top of it, and there was a TV, a 50-inch plasma on the front of this thing for the graphics, right? And I was like, and I stumbled into it, and the whole thing went, yip, and there was like a horrible, it wasn't like a scratching of a record, but it was more like of an electronic kind of noise, and the production guy just, and then the lights came on, and I'm lying on the floor. And I got like literally like 2 of the presenters, one under each arm, took me to my bedroom, dumped me in. That's amazing. And I woke up in the morning, and you know that first few seconds when you wake up when you've been really drunk, and the first few seconds you're like, oh yeah, I'm all right, I'm fine. Oh shit, I knocked down the booth.
Oh yeah. Now you mentioned, I think you've mentioned one co-host that you've worked with. How many co-hosts have you worked with throughout your career?
On the breakfast show, sort of 3 main ones. So Vicky Pictures was the first girl on the breakfast show with me, and she lasted about 18 months. And then when Vicky was let go, a girl called Jill McLaren came on. Jill's very much an Edinburgh girl, and she did about maybe 18 months as well, maybe 2 years. And that was all right. But then the management didn't really feel that it was going to go anywhere. So she was let go and from the show. And then Arlene started. And so I've been with Arlene on the show now for nearly 18 years. And when she started, 18 years ago, she thought she was too old for the station then. And I don't know how old she would be then, maybe 39, 40 maybe. Oh God, I've just revealed her real age.
You are a dead man.
I'm in trouble. But also Arlene's quite posh. She's very BBC. Hello, I'm Arlene Stewart, like that. So we had to sort of try and ease that out of her. But she is. She's the absolute bomb when it comes to co-hosts. She is. I've never met anybody. I've never heard anybody like her anywhere else on any other show who's that quick and that funny and and that just brilliant. And she doesn't try. And when she tries, she can't do it. So like, I keep saying to her, don't try. Just be Arlene. We'll do all the nuts and bolts.
It's quite ironic that you're telling her not to try too hard. When that was the thing that someone said to you.
Yeah, God, never thought about it like that. Yeah, no, God, there's a thought. Wow, maybe that was a sort of seed that had been planted many years earlier. But she's. Are you friends off air as well? Is it a true? Yeah, because I've been lucky throughout my career to always have good friends. We've got. We are really good friends. We have our moments. I mean, we've been together, working together for so long. It is like an old married couple. It really genuinely is. We bicker, and I bicker about everything that isn't important. But the bottom line is that, you know, I trust her, and she trusts me. And then we've got Marty, who's been on our show. He's the producer. And when he first started, he wasn't really meant to be on air, you know, but he just sort of chipped in every now and again. And then we thought, oh, this guy's funny. He knows what he's talking about. So he's become like a third wheel in the show. And it just seems to work. We really enjoy it.
And also, just going back slightly, you had, I want to talk about Dingo.
Oh, yeah, Dingo, yeah. So, Dingo wasn't actually a co-host, really.
Producer.
So Dingo was what Marty is now. So he was the producer of the show, and again, wasn't really meant to be on air that much. But he was such a big personality, and we started off by doing something called Dare Dingo, where people would phone in with a dare, and then he would go off and do it. And
love it.
And then eventually, he just sort of became an on-air voice. And because he was here in the studio with us anyway, he would end up, chipping in. And he was a funny guy, and because he was so Australian, I mean, he wasn't just Australian. He was like, "G'day, mate, I'm right, proper Australian." You know, like he was in your face. And then we did a weekend show, actually. So we did the Saturday show together, which was one of the first network shows that Bauer did in Scotland. Was our Saturday show, and Boogie and Dingo. And then actually that even got networked to England. So Hits Radio Network, as is now, kind of took it for a bit, but it didn't translate all that well, to be perfectly honest. And then, you know, there was a change of management again, and they decided, right, okay, we'll just keep this in Scotland, and then England will do something else. But Dingo was great, but he was kind of like the opposite of Arlene, because much as I thought he was really good, I didn't really trust him. I didn't know that he knew where the line was. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, and something that he would say that was maybe acceptable in Australia absolutely isn't acceptable in UK radio. So, and I was like, it was as a presenting experience, it wasn't as enjoyable, because I'm constantly on edge thinking, what the hell is he going to say? And then sometimes he would say something brilliant. But he was a really good mate, actually. We were like, we did go to the pub every weekend together, you know. Off air, we were fantastic pals. But on air, I was like,
yeah, I know that feeling.
You know the feeling, right?
Yeah,
But you've got to try and find a way of kind of just capturing that magic, you know, and making sure you don't want to take too much off it, but it has to stay the right side of the line.
I think it's worth it. I mean, you mentioned it there, that weekend show with Dingo got networked, but it obviously got networked onto Clyde. You got onto Clyde. Yeah,
we did. Yeah, we got that. That was the first part of the network we did. So we were on just fourth on a Saturday morning, and then we were networked to Clyde, and then we were networked to North Sound 1 in Aberdeen, and then TFM, and then eventually it was the whole of Scotland, and that worked well. And then it was Owen. Do you know Owen Ryan?
Yes, yeah.
So Owen was in charge of sort of the Hits network for a while. And he decided they were going to try and do it, because, you know, it was successful. I mean, we had great numbers in Scotland, and we'd won like a couple of Bauer Awards, and we'd been nominated for Archivas or whatever they were called back then. And so, you know, it had a good the show had a good pedigree. It was just that it's maybe something we could talk about later. Just Scottish radio presenters going on a national across England is really difficult. Do you know what I mean?
I mean, that it's strange you say that, isn't it? Because there's no reason why Scottish presenters can't succeed in England.
No, and I mean, there's exceptions. I mean, look at Ken Bruce, right? He's the the biggest name in British radio, pretty much, and he's Scottish. But he's been doing it for so long.
People have forgotten.
That English folk forget he's Scottish.
That's true.
I mean? It's true, but it is true. And I think when things come the other way, when English voices are in Scotland on Radio 2 or Radio 1 or Heart or whatever, it's just much more palatable for the audience. I don't know why that is, and you're right. There's no reason for it. If what you're saying is interesting and engaging enough, it shouldn't matter your accent. But I do maybe think it does.
I was really fortunate to work with a guy called Barry Hodge, who is one of the greatest producers I have ever worked with. And I've worked with some amazing producers, but he was, you talked about Dingo and how you were nervous because you never knew what he was going to do. But Barry was from Scotland. I think he was producing Robin Galloway. Got binned because he was.
Was he the one that got binned when they stripped in front of the First Minister or something?
That was mine and Giuliano's producer in Birmingham. But yeah, that's Barry. And no longer works in the industry either. And he was incredible. And he's just like you said about Dingo. And it's reminded me, if you told him to do something, he would do it. Like, he was brilliant. But the audience loved the fact he was Scottish. They loved it. The Brummies loved it on BR&B. And wherever we went, they were like, "Where's Barry? We love Scottish Barry." There was so much love for him.
Yeah, I'm not so sure that it's so much of an audience thing. I wonder if it's more of a management thing,
Maybe.
attitude. Arlene and I do a show now on Greatest Hits on a Sunday. 7 till 10, right across the whole of the UK. And we, I think a gauge for it is that we never get any emails telling us to piss off back to Scotland. Do you know what I mean? Nobody ever is nasty to us on any feedback or Twitter or whatever. And we get the occasional, people in Romford or Peterborough or whatever are send us a message saying they're enjoying the show, and that's great. And but if I think about what I'm going to do moving forward, where can I go? What can I do? I'm doing this sort of mini network now in Scotland across 4 stations, but Greatest Hits is one of the biggest stations in the UK. Am I going to get a strip show on Greatest Hits Radio at some point? I don't know. I don't know.
Never say never, Boogie. Never say never.
Well, I mean, yeah. It's not like a given. Do you know what I mean? It's not. I don't think it's a given. Maybe there's more to it than that. I don't know. Maybe I'm reading it too much into it. Well,
doing that the Sunday night show is a hell of an achievement in itself, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, and I really enjoy it. Enjoy the music, and it's a little bit different from playing Bruno Mars and Pink all the time. But it's good fun. Enjoy that show.
So, let's just talk about the breakfast show that you do. So, across the mini network, as you mentioned there, are you still enjoying it today as much as you? And I know you've got to say yes. So it's maybe a stupid question, but do you still enjoy it as much today as you did when you took that drive to Preston and you first ever started?
It's going to sound cliched and obvious, but I enjoy it more. I enjoy it more now because I'm so much more comfortable with it now. This new, so at the start of 25, our show was networked across 4 stations in Scotland. So basically in Bauer in Scotland, there are 6 stations. So you've got Clyde 1 and what was West FM, which is now Clyde 1 Ayrshire. And that is basically the West, and that's the huge chunk of population over there. So that's now a mini network of 2 stations. And our show in Edinburgh was networked to TFM in Dundee, North Sound 1 in Aberdeen, and MFR in Inverness. So in terms of geography, our TSA now is it's hundreds of miles long and wide. It's massive. But we are every day we are trying to make. We're not making one network radio show. We're making 4 radio shows every day, and it's a real challenge to try and do that. So we're working harder now, doing longer hours, putting more effort into it than I've done for 10, 15 years on any other show. So we're recording split links, and the technology now, Foxy, is so amazing. It blows my mind, the fact that we can do all these shows. And let's be honest, if you're listening in Aberdeen, you as a listener, somebody would have to tell you that show is not just in Aberdeen. They'd have to point it out. I don't think you would notice. You wouldn't listen to it and think that's a central show which is coming from the Central Belt, because we do so many split links. We're doing 2 split links, content links, pretty much per hour. We're doing all the split weathers, all the split news. The adverts are different. The travel is all different. So there's only maybe 30 or 40% of the content is actually universal, on all 4 of our shows. So
what? Sorry. So what time do you get in the morning then, Boogie? Because
about 4:45 ish. Right. So we in the morning, the first thing that we do is we record the split weathers and the news ins and the sense of day links. The stuff that's happening. But they're all tailored. Like Marty, our producer, writes it all. He doesn't write a script, but it's all sort of bullet points. So when we're doing the Sense of Day link in Edinburgh, we'll be like, it's the exams are on today. The kids are off school in Edinburgh. It's a local holiday. Moulin Rouge is on at the Playhouse in Edinburgh. We've got Hibs playing tonight, blah, 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 blah. And at the same time in Aberdeen, we're saying Aberdeen are taking on Rangers tonight, and there's a show on at HMT Theatre in Aberdeen. And meanwhile, Inverness is getting, it's all local to each of the markets. And so we record all that before we start the show. And then we're also recording, because we've got split links going out, it gives us big chunks during the show where we're not actually live, so we can record even more split links then. We're actually recording split links whilst we're on air. But that's all right, because we've got a massive window to allow us to do that. And so we're not putting the mic up and speaking live as often as we used to.
Yeah.
But nobody knows. No listener knows, and they don't care. They don't care as long as we're giving them the local information and then giving them a laugh about a bit of showbiz or some survey or whatever. We're giving them that as well. But it's very much 4 shows. It's not one network show that we're giving for everybody. Some shows are so big that it has to be a network. For example, Fleur, right? So Fleur's show is on 50 odd stations. So there's no way you can do it. But with us, we can, and we're going to keep doing that for as long as we can.
And obviously, Bauer are paying you 4 show fees now, which must be wonderful. Must be wonderful.
Oh, that was a good contract chat. So, right, you want me to do 4? Okay, yeah. And so that's an extra 400%, 300% on top. No, none of that. But it is nice, and it's a challenge, and I'm kind of enjoying that because I had done the same show for a long time, same breakfast show, same links, same time, same day, every day for many, many years. And although I still enjoyed it, it was, sometimes, especially in the winter months when it's dark and wet and cold. But this really has. I mean, the first week we were on, we had massive storms, but only in certain parts of the country. So we were doing split links in Inverness, saying all the schools are closed and everything's Armageddon. And meanwhile, in Edinburgh, we having to find something else to fill the same link, And so it's a real challenge, but it's enjoyable.
Is it true, and I've heard a rumour, is it true that Global tried to poach you for Heart?
Who told you that? Well, not recently, but and tried to poach is maybe stretching it a little bit. Approaches were had, and conversations were had, and nothing came of it.
Okay, we'll leave it at that.
Didn't expect that. You kept that for last, didn't you? You should have started with that, John. That was your strongest question.
That would have killed the whole thing, wouldn't it?
I can't say anything. Well, I never signed anything that says I wasn't allowed to say. Do you know what? It's a small industry, and it is now. Especially in Scotland. And you, yeah, and you never. I would never dismiss anything, because you never know. You never know what's going to happen. But I am very loyal to Fourth. Fourth is my station that I've been on for such a long time, and Edinburgh. You know, I'm well known around the town, and I'm not saying that I love being famous and all the rest of it, but you know, it's a real connection. And Fourth is we've got such a strong connection with the audience at Fourth. It's really weird. It's hard to describe, and there's no really explanation for it. I think other than the fact that we've been on for so long. Do you know what I mean? People have just grown up with it, and it's comfortable, and people enjoy it, and as long as we don't get complacent. And Edinburgh, man, I mean, Edinburgh is like, of all the cities in Britain to live in, you'd want to live in Edinburgh, right? I mean,
it's quite shameful. I've never been to Edinburgh.
What?
No,
are you serious?
Well, I have. There's a dear friend who he's a guy called Mike Borden. Used to be in the industry. I think he was at Beat 106. He's at one of the Scottish stations for some time. But anyway, he had a place just outside Glasgow, Paisley.
Oh, yeah.
He had a place there.
No wonder you didn't want to go back there. I'm joking business now.
He's now the manager of Paolo Nutini, so he's done all right.
Okay, I was going to say Paolo's from there. Yeah.
So anyway,
listen, you should definitely come up and like if you ever come up, and I'll take you for a bite to eat or something, and you've got to visit, especially in the summer. You know, when the festival's on, it's just
I love that.
It's a magical place. It's great. So you would love it.
We're having a party.
Oh yeah. So I mean, look, we can't skip over the fact that you've been on Fourth Breakfast for 22 years, which is an incredible achievement. There must have been some highs and of course some lows during that time. Any that you can share with us?
Yeah, I mean, you get lows, don't you, in life? I mean, you know, my mum died, and I was on air the next kind of couple of days, and you've got to try and... I never talked about it, you know. I never went on and I never said my mum's died. I never did that.
Not?
No. And I don't know why. I think it was probably just I didn't want to break down. You know, I didn't want to have that, oh, look at me, I'm really sad. I think you would have been all right to be sad. I think so too. Of course I would. And the audience would have absolutely gone with me on it. And so that was a strange time. That was just before Christmas. I've had some health issues as well. I had to have an operation a couple of years ago to part of my bowel away. I've got Crohn's disease, and so that was. And also when COVID struck, I was kind of working from home way longer than I had than other people because of heightened risk, you know, at the start. So there was a few lows, but the highs are amazing. I mean, you know, what did you do at work today? Well, I interviewed Dua Lipa, and then you know, I went to meet Robbie Williams, and I went to Robbie Williams right now. I would been a fan of Robbie since before I was on the radio, and I found myself in his dressing room at the Etihad in Manchester, interviewing Robbie in the home dressing room. You know, with Man City's home dressing room,
amazing,
which they turned into Robbie's dressing room. And there's curtains up and carpet and all the sofas and chaise longue and all the rest of it. And a dog running about and about 50 people running about mad. And you walk in and here's Robbie Williams just sat. And pinch yourself moments. You know, you're like, this is amazing. John Bon Jovi. Oh, this is a story. So I went to London to interview John Bon Jovi. And there was only like 3 interviews for the whole of UK, and I was one of them for Bauer. And so the night before, they'd done a gig at the BBC in London, at Radio 2. And because I was in London the night before, they said, do you want to come at the gig? And I was like, yeah, of course. So I went along. And it was only about 200 people in this room, and they were recording it all for a special for the Beat. And, you know, pinch yourself a moment. You're watching the biggest rock band in the world playing all their big hits to like 200 people. And then the next day I go to the actual studio where they recorded Band-Aid, right?
No.
So it's like, yeah, and it's like, and they say, right, so John's going to come in a second, and we've got a surprise for him. So his friend has flown all the way in from America, so we're going to give him a fake moustache and a hat, and he's going to sit in the seat. And John's going to come and sit there, and we're just going to work out. It's just going to be very funny until he works out that it's his mate in disguise. Ha ha ha. Okay. So then the door bursts open, and in comes John Bon Jovi and his sort of posse of people, and they storm right to the back of the room and into this sort of glass recording control room in the recording studio. And then there's somebody comes across, and she's like, "The joke's off. Get him out that seat, and you," pointing to me, "you sit down, get ready to go. The joke's off. John's in a filthy mood." So what had happened was the night before, somebody at the BBC had forgotten to record the guitar channel. So the whole thing was ruined. So basically they got everything except the aux wasn't on in the guitar channel, right? And John had just found out literally 5 minutes before he walked in, and he was raging. I mean, like really angry, because he'd put his life and soul into this show, and it was going to be released as an album and all the rest of it, and they'd mucked up the recording. And I'm like going, oh my God, I've got to interview him, and he's in a filthy, and there's about 50 people watching, and he sits down, and you could see the steam coming out of his ears. He was so angry, and I'm like, and they just went, "Go." And I'm like, "Hi John, how's your day going?" And I said it like that, and it was like he just went. He luckily he just realised, I was only doing my job, and he relaxed really quickly, and we had a really good interview, but terrifying. But how good's that? You're actually speaking to one-on-one to your musical heroes. Is great.
I want to know who that secret friend was. I thought you were going to say it was Elvis or something.
No, it was just a mate. It was like, it was just one of his mates who'd been in America and had happened to come across to London, and he'd been in touch with the management or something and said, "Oh, come to where he's doing the interviews, and we'll give you a fake moustache and a big pair of glasses and a hat.
He's not in the mood for that.
You can ask him like really stupid questions, and we'll film it all, and it'll be dead funny. And then eventually you just take it all off to reveal." And they were like, "No, that's not happening. John's not in the mood for a joke." Great story.
Couple more questions for you, Boogie. What has been your proudest moment in your career so far?
Winning the gold breakfast show of the year at the Arias last year.
Amazing.
I mean, that's, if you'd said to me in 1998, right, in 2024 you're going to be up for the best breakfast show in the whole of Britain, and you're going to be up against Chris Evans, Zoe Ball, Greg James, and Milo and Rosie, I think, were in that category as well. And it was like, and I'm like, what? Don't be stupid. And then to win it, it was like, because you go along, you think, oh, it's nice to be nominated, like a little nod to Scotland or whatever, a little nod to the local stations. And then we won it, and it was like, that's amazing. That's really amazing. And also, we've raised a lot of money for charity, for Cash for Kids over the time that we've been on. I don't know exactly how much, but it's a couple of million plus, over the years. So that's that's something you look back on when you're old and grey and just be like, yeah, that was a good thing to do.
And I just wanted to ask, what do you think? So your college teacher, who was a textile teacher, but then also worked at the station as well.
Yeah, John Phillips.
Yeah. Is he still with us, John Phillips?
Yeah.
Do you know? He is.
John was... John's dream, and he used to tell me this when we used to sit in the cafeteria at the college, he always wanted to be the continuity announcer on the telly. And Pointless is back tomorrow at 5:15, and now it's the news at 6. And do you know what he does now?
Go on.
He's the continuity announcer on BBC Scotland on the telly. Yeah, in fact, and I think he's done network as well. He's done it right across the UK. But he's like, coming up at 7:30, Peggy is killed in EastEnders, but first it's Pointless. He loves it.
Peggy's not still in it, is she?
I don't know. It's the only person I could remember at the top of my head.
But I mean, you've got to. There's a lot of thanks to him, isn't there, for that?
Oh man,
yeah. And I just wondered, what does he think of the amazing career that you've had?
I'm friends with him on Facebook. I haven't spoken to him for a long time, but he was the loveliest man, and I'm sure that he'd be as proud as punch that he got me into Radio Borders. But when I think of my career, I always end up going back to Rod Webster and that one call that he made. And if he hadn't made that call, and if I hadn't answered the phone that time, and if he hadn't taken, because he when he gave me the job, he went to a board meeting of SRH, which was the sort of pre-runner for Bauer, before EMAP bought SRH, Scottish Radio Holdings, right?
Yeah.
So Forth, Clyde, North Sound, Tay, and all the rest of it. And Rod went to a board meeting of the big bosses, and they were all sat around the table, and it was all very kind of, and one of them said, did you hear Rod's hired a jumper salesman? And Rod looked at them and went, have you heard him? No. Well, maybe you should listen before you decide he's terrible. But yeah, and so without Rod, I wouldn't have had the first job at Borders. I definitely wouldn't have had the first full-time gig at North Sound, and everything that has come from that, my career now, and that filters down all the way through my life. You know, my job here at Forth, my wife, who I met because I was working at Forth and I was DJing in a club and blah, blah, blah. My house, my daughter, everything all revolves around that one call with Rod. And he died, sadly, about maybe 6 or 7 years ago. And he was very young, 60s, 70s, maybe early 70s. And he was an absolute genius. And I always think of it. He'll always be sort of my godfather figure, if you like, in radio.
Well, Boogie, thank you so much for being on Crunch and Roll. I've genuinely really enjoyed myself over the last hour.
Yeah, I've loved it. I've been listening for a while, and I was a bit nervous for coming on. I'm not going to lie. Being a guest on a show is quite nerve-wracking, weirdly, but I've really enjoyed it. So thanks for having me, John.
I never know if people get nervous because, of course, you know, you and I, we've talked to thousands of people every morning for years and years, you for so many years, which is such an incredible achievement. But I wonder if it's because you know, and I think it'd be the same for me if I did an episode, you know that other radio people are listening. Yeah,
that's it. Yeah. I know that Steph Hurst and Rossi, they're all listening. And they're like, oh, I wouldn't have said that. So true.
Yeah. I think a couple of things that always happen after I've recorded an episode. Firstly, no doubt, I will Facebook request your friendship.
Yeah, absolutely. Please do.
I'm going to take you up on that offer to come to Edinburgh. I'd love to do that. And also, you'll get in touch, and I guarantee you'll say, "Oh, Fox, I forgot to tell you this story." And my favourite person to do that is Rick Horton. Don't know if you know Rick.
Rick. Yeah, he used to be on. I think he was on Rock FM evenings, perhaps.
Radio City. An absolute gent and an absolute legend. But it's my favourite time that someone's texted me that, because he said, "Oh, Foxy lad, I forgot to tell you about the time I went for a beer with Bin Laden." I'm like, how do you forget that story? How do you forget that?
That's the best tease ever. Coming up, what did I do with Bin Laden? Tell you after Bruno Mars. Is that a true story?
That is a true story, yeah. True story.
Wow.
But
we're talking about the same Bin Laden, right?
Yeah.
The 9/11 guy.
Yeah. I presume so. I don't know any other Bin Ladens. There must be.
You would change your name, wouldn't you? If your name was Horton.
But no, Boogie, thank you so much. And would you do me the honours, please, of taking us home with the end credit?
Well, you've gone to all the bother of emailing me them, so yes. You've been listening to Crunch and Roll with me, Boogie. Subscribe or follow us on your favourite podcast app to get every new episode as soon as they drop. Crunch and Roll is a 969 media production presented by the wonderful John Fox and produced by Simon Borskovsky. Oh, yeah. Whatever.